All right, welcome to the first of its kind, world-changing manufacturers network. Lisa Ryan has her ears to the ground and her heart in the game. Get ongoing education and new connections right here with Lisa and the Manufacturers Network. Buckle your seat, listen, and spread the word. Here's Lisa.
Hey, it's Lisa Ryan. Welcome to the Manufacturers Network podcast. I'm excited to introduce our guest today, Micki Vandeloo. Micki is the president of Lakesview Consulting, a team of 4 experienced grant professionals who have collectively obtained over $100 million in grant funding for nonprofit and for-profit clients in the manufacturing community. The Lakeview team provides research, writing, and consulting services to help their clients fund their successes. Micki, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Lisa. I appreciate you having me on.
So share with us a little bit about your background and what led you to doing what you do with Lakeview.
Sure. So I spent over 25 years in manufacturing. I worked in all areas of manufacturing, including automotive, steel service centers. I worked for an MEP center, a Manufacturing Extension Partnership Center, for about 7 years. I worked for Boeing at the very beginning of my career. So I've worked in small and large and with small and large manufacturers throughout my career. My bachelor's is in industrial engineering. And now me being a grant writer, that isn't the most natural way to get to grant writing. But what I did was I found through my employment for manufacturers and also I'm working with manufacturers that there were manufacturing grants out there that they could access, but were not, mainly because they didn't have the resources, the time, or the people to go looking for the grants. They're sometimes very hard to find. Or if they did know about a grant, they didn't have the resources to pursue that grant, to write that grant. They didn't know how to do it. They thought it was too complex. So I helped a couple of my employers get grants. One very significant grant was one that I got for the Steel Service Center that I worked for in 2008. Similar to COVID, there was the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, which provided money to states, similar to the ARPA funds that just recently went out. And those states were allowed to spend out that money as they saw fit, but mostly were put toward energy projects. And I was working for a steel service center that did coil and sheet steel processing. And I found that we could participate in the wind energy supply chain. And the state of Illinois, where I live, did a grant program to help bolster the wind energy industry in the state of Illinois. And so I helped my company get $2.3 million to support a lot of equipment purchases, hiring people, training people, purchasing capital equipment, expanding our capabilities to really, in the long term, it actually greatly increased their capabilities for all sectors, but specifically for the wind energy industry. So I basically started my business knowing that manufacturers really needed help identifying and accessing grants. And so that's why I started Lakeview. I started Lakeview as a side hustle back in 2010. We incorporated in 2014, and I went full-time in the business in 2017. And I do have 4 employees on staff. I have a researcher who dogs everybody to find all the grants that are possible for manufacturers throughout the United States. And I also have a project manager / business development person. And I have 2 full-time writers on staff. So we've grown a lot. And my goal is just to get the word out about manufacturing grants to manufacturers.
Let's go back to Grants 101. Because again, you have discovered it's not really well known in manufacturing. Where does the money come from? Like, how do you discover this? What's the very basic of why grant?
Sure. So manufacturing grants traditionally come from the states in which the manufacturing sites are located. To go back even further, a grant is a sum of money that is given to a company. It does not have to be repaid. It's a sum of money given to a company to accomplish a certain outcome. An outcome is what's going to change as a result of a grant. So I'll use this for an example. If a company gets a training grant, training grants are the most, if I find that manufacturers know anything about grants, it's typically training grants that they get through a local community college or some organization. And So if somebody's got a training grant, they're being paid money by the state to help support the training that will give their employees greater opportunities within their company. So that's the outcome. That's what's going to change. Those employees will have greater opportunities, but greater skills to be able to progress within the company. So that's what a grant is. Grants come, like I said, from the states in which those manufacturers are located. So we work a lot with companies that have multiple locations in multiple states. So we look for grants in each of those different states. In addition, because, and in large part because of COVID and a lot of the supply chain issues that came about as far as from COVID, there is a larger amount now of federal grants for manufacturers. Not all manufacturers can apply for those grants. It's typically ones in very specific sectors like electric vehicle manufacturing, battery manufacturing, semiconductor manufacturing, chip manufacturing. So there's a wider pool of federal money. However, when I'm working with especially smaller companies that don't have a lot of experience with grants, we start with the state grant because they are simpler, they are easier to access, and they're much less competitive than a federal grant. So grant, and then there's also what's called pass-through money, which is money that is federally funded, but then passes through either to the states or to local regional organizations. There are two big examples of that in the manufacturing sector. One is the STEP grant, which is a state trade export program. That program can be used by manufacturers in a particular state to attend foreign trade shows, to send supplies overseas, to get certifications they need to produce products in export markets, connections to Gold Key program through the SBA, which is like a matchmaking program for manufacturers and foreign buyers. So that's the STEP program, and that is federal funding that states apply for, and most states have that funding to offer to manufacturers. The other big program for manufacturers is through USDA. The USDA gets funded through regional centers. So there's regional USDA centers, and there's also a state office in every state for USDA. So USDA is for companies that are in USDA eligible areas, which are typically smaller communities or communities that are outside of an urban area. I find that a lot of companies, even though they don't think they're in a rural area, they are still USDA eligible. It's real easy to check eligibility, but if a company is eligible, they can apply for what's called REAP funding, which is Rural Energy for America program funding. And that funding got a big boost through COVID, and it will pay for renewable energy projects. Up to half of those project costs up to $1 million. And then for energy efficiency projects, half the project costs to a total of $5,000. So those are two pass-through funds that manufacturers can access.
Huh. So that is the USDA, because when I think of USDA, it's Department of Agriculture, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
Okay. So that, again, right there, that wouldn't even, if I was a manufacturer, I wouldn't even think, I don't do farm stuff. Why would I qualify for a USDA?
And it's very interesting because they actually have a rural business program. So that's part of their rural business program. There's also loans through it, USDA, that manufacturers can access, again, if they're in that rural area. There's also some targeted programs through USDA for like value-added producer, like farm to table or farm to retail industry. So if it like for example, I worked with a dairy organization up in, I believe it was Wisconsin, and they were applying for the value-added producers grant for USDA, which manufacturers can apply for. And that program funds marketing and expansions to facilities to do new product or to offer new products to the consumer. So they were actually building a creamery and up in Wisconsin, and so they got part of that funded through the value-added producers. So they do have some targeted grant programs too, mainly around the food area. But yeah, it isn't the most natural place to manufacture would work for sure.
So if all the states have these grants, why are they so hard to find?
That's a really good question. I can't really say. The only thing I can tell you is that, for example, there's not a tremendous amount of representation to manufacturers from the state economic development organizations, which is where the grants come through. So, for example, in Illinois, I believe there's maybe 4 people statewide. So there's not a lot of opportunities for publicity for the grant. In addition, I just find that even though they want to spend out the money, it seems like they don't know where to put grants in their website. They bury them. And so it's very hard for manufacturers to find all the grants. I don't really know why it is, because some of them have contacted me over the years and said, we want to spend out our money. Do you know anybody that can use this money? So it's crazy that they want to spend the money, and they need to spend the money because a lot of these grants are budgeted through the state budget. And if they don't spend out the money, then they won't get as much money the next year. So there's a definite incentive from the state economic development organizations to distribute the money.
So you had mentioned workforce and training, energy, and technology. What are the other areas that grants that manufacturers can get grants for, if any?
Sure. Yeah, sure. Training is the big one. The most common are the workforce training grants, as I mentioned. Other areas are facilities and capital, specifically high technology equipment purchases. For example, the state of Indiana has what's called the Manufacturing Readiness Grant, and it offers up to $250,000 for companies in Indiana to purchase equipment that is higher technology or software that helps run equipment that is higher technology. There's some Industry 4.0 grants through different states that fund, again, these more advanced technology types of incentives or investments. So some facility and capital, recycling is a big one. So a lot of states have recycling grant programs that can fund like collection containers or balers, cardboard balers. It might be in a manufacturing facility. In the state of Missouri, they actually offer what's called a Missouri Market Development Grant. That's up to $250,000 for equipment that processes recycled material. Recycling is another big one. Energy efficiency. So a lot of the large utilities have incentives for energy efficiency, as well as the USDA program that I mentioned before. There are proof of concept grants in some states. Some states have really embraced what's called technology-based economic development, TBED. And through that, they've started to offer things like state R&D tax credit, and they've also offer what's called proof of concept grant. So if a company is looking at a certain technology and they have to do that proof of concept, this will fund a partnership between the manufacturer and the university to prove out the fund. So that on the technology side. The other area is exporting. We talked about the STEP grants before, so there are a lot of efforts to fund exporting, mainly because states really like to incentivize that, obviously, for manufacturers to get into new markets. So those are the big areas. And basically, those areas are all economic development areas. So basically, anything from an economic development standpoint that can lead to new jobs and increased investment is good for the state economy, and that's what they're going to incentivize.
So as far as the process, I want to buy a piece of equipment, and I know that if I go to the bank to get a loan, there's a lot of paperwork, but there's just a cut and dry process. When I think grant, I just think like really convoluted, difficult system that I have to give out my company and say why I deserve this grant. So that's my thoughts about it, probably the thoughts of some of my audience here. So is that a myth, or what's the reality with loans versus grants and getting money?
Sure. Yeah, I completely agree with you on the aspect of you fill out a loan application and you get the money, but you have to pay that money back. You have to pay it back with interest. That is not the case with a grant. What I always tell clients is the complexity of the grant application and the amount of information they will request is directly proportional to the size of the grant. So if you're applying for a $20,000 training grant, it's not going to be a particularly convoluted application. You're basically going to have to say, these are the training courses we're providing. These are the people we're going to train, a short blurb on why you're going to train them. And that's about it, really. So that's not very complex. On the other end of that, like if you're applying for $250,000 through any state for maybe an equipment purchase or something, you're going to have to give more information. You're going to have to give information. You likely will have to get at least 3 quotes for the equipment. You're going to have to give information on why you're putting the equipment in, how many jobs are going to be created as a result of that investment. So there's a lot more information as far as what markets you're going to serve. Sometimes you need letters of commitment from those people in those markets to say, we're going to buy this new product. If this person puts in this, you're going to have to do a study in a lot of cases. Like for rate funding, you have to do an energy study to see what the energy savings is going to be through maybe for solar panels or something you're going to put in from a renewable energy standpoint. So the more money you're getting from a grant, the more complex it is. But we really try to walk our clients through that. We collect the information and we put it in the application as the funder would want to see it. So one area the manufacturers really can get tripped up is there's a lot of requirements for grant applications, word count, font size, certain information, like they have to have resumes, there's a lot of information. And if they don't read that application really carefully, their application is going to get thrown out because they didn't meet all the requirements of the application. So if, for example, a funder wants you to put together a 1-page justification for why you want the money and you do 2 pages, they can throw out that application. So that's why we get involved in the process, is because we know those things. We know what funders want to see. We know how they want things to be stated. And while it may seem really simple to just answer questions, sometimes people get off base a little bit, especially if they're very technical. They'll get into their technical jargon and they'll start to use acronyms and things that no reviewer would ever understand. So we try to get them to explain it to us, and then we explain it to the reviewer, essentially. So.
And how long does the process take? And I know it's across the board, but on average, what's the expectation?
So if we are asked to, if a client has a grant they want to apply for, and we start, if it's a state grant, those take, because they're not as complex, typically, those take 2 to 3 weeks usually to fill out those applications. And then once you submit it, you can't do anything. That's the other thing that I really want your audience to know is they've already purchased a piece of equipment. They can't apply for a grant for that equipment. You have to get the grant approved before you can actually do anything you propose to do under that grant. So if you do a state application and it takes 2 to 3 weeks for us to fill it out, depending on when the deadlines are, if they're doing 1 review, if they're doing ongoing reviews. But if they're doing ongoing reviews, best case, you can probably expect to find out in 2 to 3 weeks from that time when you submit that grant. If there's a deadline and that deadline's not for 2 months and they're doing 1 review of all applications under that deadline, then you probably won't find out for 3 to 4 months. So from a state standpoint, it could be weeks to months. It can be, 4 to 6 weeks from time of beginning the application to getting the award. From the federal standpoint, it can take 2 to 3 months just to fill out the application because they're very complex. Many times there's 30 to 40 pages of narrative required. There's just a lot of information that has to be collected. But once you submit that, typically those are under deadlines, but once you submit it under their deadline, you might not find out for 3 to 6 months if you've got the award. The one exception in not buying things before you get the award is USDA allows you to apply and submit an application. And then anytime after you submit the application for the REAP program, you can actually purchase solar panels. You can do all the things you said you're going to do. You just aren't going to know if you're going to get a grant to do them or not. So you can actually start your buying process a little quicker.
And do they let you know either way?
Yes, typically they do. Mm-hmm. But with USDA in particular, they are very slow at reviewing applications. So that's why I believe they let you go ahead and purchase your materials, because it can take 6 months to a year to find out if you get money or not.
And so when it comes to the thing that really gets my mind working is the workforce and the training, which you said is the number one use of grants anyway. And it seems to me that would take away a lot of the excuses that people use to not train their people. Yeah. So a couple examples of some of the clients you've worked with, particularly in training, because again, I focus a lot on workforce and training and building that type of culture, especially in today's economy that attracts and keeps great people. And training is one of the best ways to do that. So what does that look like?
That can look a number of different ways. So we are working with a company in Florida right now, a manufacturer in Florida that does medical equipment. And we've got them about $30,000 to do leadership training. So they are They were doing a very large leadership training program, and that funded about 75% of that training program with their employees. So that enabled them to put, I believe it was 10 or 12 people through a pretty detailed leadership, multi-level leadership training. And they paid about 25% of the cost of the training. Most training grants will cover half of the cost of the training or more. There's a couple of different avenues for training grants. Some states offer training grants through the state, and those can look like just regular workforce training grants. They can be apprenticeship grants. So there's a lot of states now that are incentivizing apprenticeships and the development and the delivery of apprenticeship programs. And those, in many cases, can fund part of the curriculum development, the related training instruction for the apprenticeship. So there's a lot of different avenues those apprenticeship grants can go. So we are actually helping, we helped a company, it's more of a retail, it's a very well-known retail automotive company. We helped them get $500,000 from the state of Texas to expand their apprenticeship program, their work-based learning program. So work-based learning is another area that states are incentivizing. An internship, so there are grants from states to hire and employ interns. So they'll cover part of the cost of that intern's wages. Typically, they cover a flat amount of money. So it's $1,500 or $3,000 to support an intern for a summer or during a holiday break or during the semester. So that's another area of training grants that the states have gotten into. Some states will also cover curriculum development. So the state of Pennsylvania's training grant program, we helped a trade association foundation. So we work with a lot of trade association education foundations. And that one foundation actually applied and got $600,000, I believe it was, from the state of Pennsylvania to actually expand their summer camp program and the development of the curriculum and through the state of Pennsylvania. So they actually will fund a little bit further, especially if it's career training. A lot of states, if it creates a career pathway or encourages a career pathway, a lot more states are starting to incentivize those types of programs as well.
Now, one of the things that I talk about in my programs is partnering with community colleges and joint vocational schools and that type of thing, because they can basically create programs to give you exactly the future employees that you want.
Right.
So when it goes through like a community college, is it the community college that's getting the grant, or is it the company that's getting the grant that then they pay the community college? How does that work?
Usually, and some states will only provide grants to community colleges. Like they'll provide a grant fund to a community college that they can then go and talk to manufacturers about and use to offset the cost of their training with manufacturers. The state of Illinois does that. As an example, they partner with community colleges and those community colleges get grants. Partnerships, though, with manufacturing are really interesting because even like non-training grant can require partnership. So there are, like I mentioned before, the proof of concept that manufacturer has to partner with a university or a research organization to do the testing for the proof of concept. So many times states will use grants that can be awarded to manufacturers, but only in the case that they partner with a research institution or a nonprofit and a lot of those are training grants as well, like where they have to partner with a nonprofit that would provide a pipeline of people. So like a Boys and Girls Club or something like that. And then many states have started to do apprenticeship grants, apprenticeship navigating grants and those types of things to actually allow manufacturers to be informed of apprentices that are available, and they fund the actual navigators is what they call them. But that's another program that funds getting the word out about apprenticeships to manufacturers. So.
And is this a more of a recent development? Because it seemed like when I was in high school, it was all about shop and metal shop and auto shop. And then all of those programs disappeared for a while. And now it seems that people are going, we really need plumbers and welders and all these technical people. So there's a lot more investment going in. So are you seeing that same thing, that there's that focus on tech?
I think that's why there's so many career pathway oriented grants now, because they're back to trying to encourage in whatever way possible those industrial arts programs that we've lost, those shop programs that we've lost. Many have lost building trade. So they're trying to encourage schools and partnerships with manufacturing or programs like this one with the Trade Association Foundation. They do a summer camp program to help encourage kids to get into manufacturing. And they're very hands-on programs. So I think the funding of those types of programs is very indicative of the fact that they're trying to encourage pathways as much as possible in the absence of having those industrial arts programs and those types of things. Yes.
And how old are the kids that they're encouraging to go to this camp?
They start, I believe, at 4th or 5th grade. So they start early with them, and they progress. And so they actually have progressive. They actually have a girls program that's called the Glow Camp. The program is the Nuts, Bolts, and Thingamajigs program through the Fabricating and Manufacturing Association, FMA. And it's a great program. They're nationwide. I don't even know how many hundreds of camps they do, but they do a lot of different camps. But they do a Glow Camp for girls. They do a camp for just the students. So they just started those to help them learn about manufacturing careers. And that actually partners the camp participants up with manufacturers who then can hire them at the end of the camp. And then their summer camp program is their big mainstay program. But it's a wonderful program.
Yeah, one of the programs I got involved with a couple of years ago was STEM Goes Red for Girls. So it's part of the American Heart Association, but focusing on those 7th to 9th grade girls to bring them in. So it's just been really interesting, and starting early, like you said, 4th or 5th grade. I'm seeing 7th to 9th grade girls, because by the time they get to high school or college level, they've already made their decision. It's almost like it's too late to find those people.
Right. And what's beautiful about the Nuts, Bolts, and Thingamajigs program is that they also offer scholarships to colleges and technical and vocational schools that graduates and their summer camp programs can apply for, which I think just really provides that continuum of education. But you're exactly right. I heard a stat one time that if you don't get to kids by the time they're in the 7th grade, you've lost them, because one, they get more disengaged in school, and they either don't know their direction or get very confused about their direction, or they know exactly what they're going to do and they've decided to go to college, and they're going to go to college, and they're going to go the traditional route, which isn't bad. I never thought that's a bad thing necessarily. I went to college. Both my boys went to college, but I don't think that's the only way to go. And I think, just getting on my soapbox, there are a lot of different ways to get into a manufacturing career, and not all of them require a 4-year education at a major university.
Right, exactly. And that is, I took a very non-traditional path through. I was on the 14-year plan for my college degree. I also think about things like schools using Manufacturing Day, for example, to do plant tours and to bring people in. Have you seen any of the clients that you're using doing anything interesting with Manufacturing Day, the first Friday in October?
Yeah, we tend to work with companies that are in growth mode. So yes, a lot of them are really trying very hard. We have a couple of clients who actually have workforce development programs in the prison system in order to get workers. So they will start to train them for jobs when they're incarcerated. And then once they get out, they can be employed. So that's something rather unusual. These disabled camp veterans, manufacturers can hire those people. And I think that's a wonderful alternate source of workers. There's a lot of disabled people that can be a very important part of a workforce for a company, as well as the previously incarcerated for nonviolent offenses. So a lot more manufacturers are getting much more open to that. I also find that a lot more manufacturers are starting to work more with high schools and with vocational schools. It's hit and miss depending on where the manufacturer is, because there's not always a vocational school nearby, and the high schools in their area aren't always really willing to work with them. So I think it's very interesting that I also hear that side of it from a lot of manufacturers. You know, they struggle to find people. And the thing that's sad to me is, I saw this when I was working in manufacturing. I haven't worked in manufacturing for over 10 years. So I can tell you, this has been a long time coming. And it's a result of a misconception about the fact that everybody needs to go to college. I know
Right.
there's a lot of great high school counselors out there. I also know there's a lot of counselors that is the only way they direct their students. And I think it's a big ship that has to be turned. And I think manufacturing day is the start of it. But I tell companies, if you really want to get people, you've got to get out in the community. You've got to get out there and you've got to engage and you've got to keep engaging. You've got to be on these community college industry boards. You've got to be active and visible in the community. You have to open your doors as much as you can, not just in October. You can open your
Right.
doors on a weekly basis. I do know there is a couple of companies that offer like a welding program to the public just to try to get people interested in welding. So I also live in a rural area and it's very hard to find people in rural areas. And again, getting visible. The CEO programs are great programs for manufacturers to sponsor there. And it involves very enterprising high school students. And I think those are the kind of people that manufacturers would want as well.
Yeah. But it's interesting too. And I know that we're getting to the end of our time together, but changing that whole philosophy of parents being okay with their kids not taking the traditional path and going to a 4-year college,
Right.
but going into the manufacturing of the trades, but also the workers and owners of these manufacturing facilities to be okay with people who are convicted felons, like you said, for nonviolent
Yeah.
crime. Because when you look at the recidivism rate of people who are given that second chance, where people are actually taking a chance on them, it's not only good for the company, it's good for the individuals, and it's good for the economy. Like you said, that's a big ship that is turning slowly, but we have to continue to just have that conversation to make it okay to attract the talent we need in these roles.
Absolutely. I've also heard that manufacturers have had really good luck with the drug court in their areas, with getting employees from the drug courts, because once the employees from drug courts are rehabilitated through the drug system, through the drug court system, they then mentor somebody else and they find that it's a really good way to get referrals to additional. So they have to mentor somebody else. So I think I agree with you. I think that it's such a hardship to turn because there are so many levels that need to be addressed. So it's the parents, it's the educators, it's the counselors, it's the students. There's a whole lot of levels of people. And I know there's a lot of people working on it right now.
If somebody was curious about some of the opportunities for grants that may be available to them, what's your process? What's the best way to get a hold of you? And what does that look like once they do?
You can go to my website, lakeviewconsulting.net. And on there, there's a contact me tab, and you can contact me directly through my website. The other thing on my website is we have what's called a manufacturing grants database. And it's going through a refresh right now, but we're going to be debuting a free version of the manufacturing database. So somebody could go in there and look to see exactly what grants are offered in their state. And then if they want a more detailed view, it's $25 a month to subscribe to the premium version of that. So they can actually get monthly updates or continuous updates on grants that are available to them nationwide at the federal or the state level. And even if it's not free, it's very inexpensive to do that. But if they want to contact me through my website, they can also contact me through my email directly at Micki, Micki, at lakeviewconsulting.net.
Well, Micki, it has been such a pleasure having you on the show today. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it, Lisa.
I'm Lisa Ryan, and this is the Manufacturers Network podcast. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Manufacturers Network podcast. Do me a favor and share this podcast with your friends and colleagues so we can grow this network and connect more fantastic folks just like you. You can either send your buddies to the website at manufacturers-network.com or share the Manufacturers Network podcast on your LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or wherever you and your industry friends hang out. The bigger and faster we grow the network, the stronger and deeper the community we'll all have. Thanks again, and I appreciate you.